A Chinese girl witnesses the arrest of her parish priest and the profanation of the church. They've reached the tabernacle, opened it, and thrown the Eucharist on the floor. The girl is horrified. She decides to come every day in hiding to pray before the Lord and adore Him. From this day onward, she will come to consume a consecrated host each day. By now, only one host remained. The girl went to the church as always. She prayed and remained in adoration. And like every other day, she consumed the host. In that very moment, a shot was fired, and she fell down dead, martyr of her love for the Eucharist. She had been discovered by the communists.
It can be very difficult for Catholics to believe in the Eucharist, especially for me. I mean, I've had trouble believing in the Eucharist sometimes.
I always have to kind of keep on reminding myself, He's there, He's there. That's not just a host, that's Christ, but it's
just kind of, you know, living my life totally asleep until very recently, actually, when it's really like, wow, this is actually something real. The Eucharist is really Jesus.
I stopped a moment to think about why my heart was so empty, feeling so awful inside, and that feeling that you're 16, 17 years old and got nothing to live for, without a reason to keep going. How can this be? I've still got so much life to live. And the next day, that evening, the priest said, "We're going to have a holy hour." And then I see him leading us into the chapel. It wasn't beautiful, it wasn't anything. And that night, there wasn't anybody singing, there wasn't anybody giving a meditation. The only ones there were the priest and the Blessed Sacrament. The priest exposed the Blessed Sacrament and went into the confessional, and he just left us there on our own, for an hour, or 2 hours, I'm not sure how long it was. And I thought, what is he doing? He's just going to leave us here on our own? And what am I supposed to do for an hour here in the chapel? I don't know. I don't know what happened. But that night, that piece of bread was in the monstrance on the altar. And I was looking at him. And I could feel him looking at me. And I said, "No, you're a piece of bread, and pieces of bread can't talk. It can't be, no, no." But in this no, 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 there was a moment in which I felt I had been disarmed. I had to give in. And I remember opening my heart, just a crack, but I opened it. And the Lord came in. Right that minute, my life changed. Everything that had been void of meaning started to make sense. Where there had been only darkness, suddenly light came in. I hadn't understood anything before, and suddenly I understood everything. That's what happened. Because the Lord was in the Eucharist, and the Lord had entered into my heart. And all of a sudden, I understood everything, because my heart was made for the Lord.
If Jesus is present under the Eucharistic species, that presence will last as long as the Eucharistic species remain. That is why at first, the Church conserved the Eucharist in order to distribute it to those absent, especially the sick, the homebound, who could not participate in the celebration of the Eucharist. Yet at the same time, the celebration of the Eucharist has always been understood as an act of adoration.
The historical moment in which the ritual of adoration became a moment independent from that of the Eucharistic celebration was the High Middle Ages. The custom of conserving the Eucharist as viaticum for the sick is an ancient tradition that dates back to the earliest times of the Church. However, it appears that from the 13th century onward, Christians began to customarily pause before the Eucharist in prayer.
Hay un momento en que el Espíritu Santo te hace.
There's a moment in which the Holy Spirit makes you realize that what you are seeing before your eyes, that piece of bread in the Mass, is not just bread, it's the Eucharist. And that's when one of the gifts of the Holy Spirit, which is the gift of piety, arises spontaneously in a person. The gift of piety is what helps us relate to God as Father and cultivates in us religious sentiments, an inclination towards adoration, this recognizing that God is God and I am merely a creature.
Pues de adoración, de reconocer que Dios es Dios y que yo soy una simple criatura.
En estos momentos pienso que vivimos.
I think that today, through the practice of adoration, we are living out a kind of second Pentecost. What occurred at Pentecost? They were praying, supplicating, living in communion through prayer, waiting for God to fulfill His promise. This is what takes place in adoration. And what's more, God fulfills His promise. And through adoration, He gives us the strength of the Spirit and urges us to proclaim Christ. The world cannot live without Him. The world cannot live without God. The world cannot live without God's love, nor can it live without His truth, which is truth for the world. Without it, the world collapses. It crumbles to pieces, as we are witnessing. And the answer to this great need, to this great and pressing emergency that we cannot put off until tomorrow, is the new evangelization. God Himself accompanies us in this rediscovery of Eucharistic adoration and in the simple rediscovery of the Eucharist itself, in which everything is contained.
¿Dónde está todo?